Hello friends, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Drift. The world outside can be busy and loud, but here things slow down. This is a quiet place where curious minds can drift off to sleep or simply learn a thing or two while relaxing. Tonight we're not just looking at mountains, rivers and forests. We are stepping into them, breathing their air, and letting their slow, patient rhythms carry us somewhere calm and still. We'll wander gently through nature's most extraordinary stories. A lake that turns living things to stone, a bird that dances for days to win a single glance, rain that falls upward into the clouds, and a fish that carries its young inside its own body. Fact by quiet fact, we'll move through jungles and tide pools, across frozen tundras and warm, shallow seas, discovering the hidden world that quietly hums beneath the one we see every day. And just before we begin, if these calm, curious explorations help you unwind or give you a quiet way to end your day, consider liking and subscribing, or simply sharing your thoughts down in the comments. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. Now, if you're ready, let's begin. The ocean produces more than half of the oxygen we breathe. When people think of oxygen, they often picture green forests and tall trees. But the majority of the air we breathe with every slow breath we take right now has a very different origin. It comes from the ocean. Tiny microscopic organisms called phytoplankton float near the surface of the sea, drifting in their billions just below the waves. Like plants on land, they use sunlight to carry out photosynthesis, quietly releasing oxygen as they do. Scientists estimate that between 50 and 80% of Earth's oxygen supply is produced this way, out at sea, by creatures so small they are invisible to the naked eye. These phytoplankton are also the foundation of nearly all ocean life. Everything from small shrimp to the largest whales depends on them in one way or another. They bloom in vast patches that can sometimes be seen from space, turning sections of the ocean vivid shades of green or turquoise. Then just as quickly they fade. When you breathe in right now, chances are that more than half of that breath was made somewhere over the ocean by a living thing tinier than a speck of dust. Some rivers glow bright blue at night. In a few remarkable places around the world, the water itself seems to come alive after dark. Certain bays, lagoons, and slow-moving rivers are home to microscopic organisms that release light when disturbed. This glow is called bioluminescence, and it works through a chemical reaction inside the organism's body, producing light without heat in the same way a firefly does. When a fish darts through the water, it leaves a trail of cold blue light. When a swimmer moves their arm, the water lights up around it like liquid electricity. In places like certain coastal caves in New Zealand or sheltered bays in tropical regions, this glow can be so intense that it casts faint shadows. The organisms producing it are simply going about their lives, eating, drifting, dividing. The light is a side effect, a byproduct of being alive. On still nights, when the sky above is dark and clear, the water below sometimes reflects the stars so perfectly that it becomes impossible to tell where the sky ends and the sea begins. Honeybees make decisions together through a kind of dance. When a colony of honeybees outgrows its hive and must find a new home, something remarkable takes place. Scout bees fly out in different directions, each one searching for a suitable hollow in a tree or crack in a rock that might serve as a new nest. When a scout finds a promising location, she returns to the swarm and performs a waggle dance, a precise, looping movement that communicates both the direction and the distance to what she has found. Other scouts watch. Some fly out to check the location for themselves. If they agree it is good, they return and join in the same dance, growing the group of supporters. The scouts that found less suitable locations gradually stop dancing if no one joins them. Eventually, all the dancers are performing the same direction, and the swarm lifts off together toward the chosen home. There is no leader making this decision. There is no single bee in charge. The decision emerges from thousands of small dances, a form of collective intelligence that has guided bees to safe homes for millions of years. The oldest known living animal was over 500 years old. In the year 2006, scientists were studying ocean quahog clams collected from the waters near Iceland. They examined the growth rings on the clams' shells, counting each ring the way a botanist might count the rings inside a tree trunk, each one marking another year of life. When they reached the center of one particular shell, they stopped counting at 507 rings. The clam, which researchers later named Ming, had been alive since the year 1499, before the Americas were widely known to Europeans, before the telescope was invented, before much of the modern world as we know it had taken shape. For 5 centuries, this small clam had sat quietly on the seafloor, filtering water, growing its shell one thin layer at a time. It had survived storms and shifting currents and changes in the water around it. It had outlasted empires and languages and entire ways of human life. In the end, it was the scientists' examination that ended its life. The discovery that something so outwardly simple could live so long quietly changed what researchers understood about aging in the animal world. Snow absorbs sound and makes the world go quiet. There is a reason the world feels so peaceful after a heavy snowfall. It is not simply that people stay indoors or that fewer cars travel the roads. The snow itself is actively absorbing sound. Each snowflake is a lattice of ice crystals with tiny air pockets trapped between them. When sound waves travel through air and encounter a blanket of fresh snow, those air pockets trap the waves and prevent them from bouncing back. The result is that echoes disappear and noise fades more quickly than usual. This effect is most powerful in the hours just after snowfall, before the flakes compact and the air pockets collapse. A freshly, snow-covered landscape is one of the quietest places a person can stand. The muffled stillness of a winter morning after a night of heavy snow is not an illusion. It is physics, working softly in every direction at once. The world really does go quieter. The snow holds the silence in place like a hand pressed gently over everything. A single bolt of lightning can contain enough energy to toast 100,000 slices of bread. Lightning is one of nature's most dramatic events, but most people don't stop to consider just how much raw energy is packed into a single bolt. Each strike lasts only a fraction of a second, but in that instant an enormous amount of electrical energy is released. Scientists have calculated that this energy, if it could somehow be perfectly captured and stored, would be enough to power a small household for several hours, or to toast an extraordinary number of slices of bread. Of course, lightning does not stay still long enough to be harnessed easily. It travels from cloud to ground and back again in less than the time it takes to blink. The channel it cuts through the air is only about as wide as a human thumb, but the temperature inside that channel reaches roughly 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. In that brief, blazing moment, The air around the bolt expands so rapidly that it creates the crack of thunder we hear seconds later. Every day across the planet, nearly 8 million of these extraordinary events take place. Some caterpillars completely dissolve inside their cocoons before becoming butterflies. Most people know that a caterpillar goes into a cocoon and comes out as a butterfly, but the process of what happens inside is far stranger and more beautiful than most people realize. When a caterpillar seals itself inside its chrysalis, it does not simply rearrange its body parts, it largely dissolves. The caterpillar releases enzymes that break down most of its tissues into a rich, nutrient-dense liquid. For a period, the contents of the chrysalis are closer to a living soup than anything recognizable as an insect. Within this liquid, however, clusters of cells called imaginal discs survive. These discs were present in the caterpillar all along, dormant and waiting. Each disc is programmed to become a specific part of the butterfly. One becomes a wing, another an eye, another a leg. They use the nutrient soup around them as raw material, building the butterfly body from scratch. The creature that emerges is so different from the one that went in that it is almost a separate organism. And yet some studies have suggested that butterflies can retain memories formed when they were caterpillars, as if some thread of identity survives even through complete dissolution. The driest place on Earth is not a hot desert. Most people would guess that the driest spot on Earth is somewhere in the Sahara or the Arabian Peninsula, where sand stretches to every horizon and the sun is merciless. But they would be wrong. The driest place on Earth is Antarctica, specifically a region of it called the McMurdo Dry Valleys. These valleys receive almost no snowfall and have seen no rainfall in approximately 2 million years. The air is so cold and so dry that any moisture that does appear simply evaporates or sublimates before it can accumulate. The valleys exist because the surrounding mountains block the flow of glaciers, and the fierce polar winds that sweep down through them carry away any snow before it can settle. From the air, the valleys look almost Martian, stretching in pale browns and greys with occasional glimmers of frozen lake surfaces. Scientists have used them as analogues for conditions on Mars, and yet even here, life persists. Bacteria live inside rocks, surviving by absorbing the tiny amounts of light that filter through translucent stone. Even in the most lifeless-looking corner of our planet, something has found a way. Trees in a forest can communicate warnings in less than an hour. When insects begin feeding on the leaves of one tree in a forest, that tree does not simply sit and wait for the damage to worsen. Within minutes, it begins releasing specific, volatile chemicals into the air around it. Neighboring trees of the same species can detect these airborne signals through tiny pores in their leaves and bark. Upon receiving the warning, they begin changing the chemistry of their own leaves, producing tannins or other compounds that make the foliage tougher and less nutritious to eat. This process can ripple outward through a forest in waves, the warning moving from tree to tree as each one picks up the signal and begins its own response. The entire exchange happens without sound, without movement, carried entirely on the air. Researchers studying this phenomenon have timed responses in certain tree species at under an hour, from the first sign of insect attack to widespread defensive changes across the surrounding forest. The trees are not thinking in the way animals do. They have no brains, no nervous systems. But they are responding, adapting, and in a very real sense, looking out for one another. Some fish father their young by carrying them inside their mouths. In the warm coastal waters of tropical seas, a remarkable form of parenting takes place among certain species of cichlid fish and mouth brooders. After the female lays her eggs and the male fertilizes them, one of the parents, in many species it is the mother, but in some it is the father, scoops the eggs gently into their mouth. They carry them there, protected in the warm, oxygenated chamber, for weeks as the eggs develop. During this time, the parent does not eat. They fast completely, sacrificing their own nutrition for the safety of their young. When the eggs hatch into tiny fish, the parent continues to shelter them inside their mouth for a further period, allowing the babies to dash out to feed and then return when danger appears. The parent holds perfectly still, wide-eyed, while dozens of miniature fish pour in and out of their open mouth in brief, frantic bursts. Eventually, the young fish grow large enough to survive on their own, and the parent finally eats again, thin and patient, their months of careful fasting quietly complete. The sky on Mars is not black at night, but has a pale blue glow. Most people imagine the night sky on Mars as a deep, perfect black dusted with stars. But the reality is gentler and far more surprising. When the sun sets on Mars, the sky transitions through unusual colors. During the day, the sky is a dusty pinkish tan due to fine iron oxide particles suspended in the thin atmosphere. But during twilight, as the sun dips below the horizon, the sky around where the sun has set turns a quiet shade of blue. This happens because the dust particles in the Martian atmosphere scatter blue light in a way that is almost the opposite of Earth's atmosphere, where dust and moisture scatter the shorter wavelengths and make sunsets appear orange and red. On Mars, the fine dust scatters blue wavelengths most efficiently right at the horizon during twilight. The effect lasts for a while after sunset, leaving a soft blue glow along the edge of the world. It is one of the stranger beauties of a planet where almost everything is red, a quiet blue light settling over the cold and empty plains as the temperature drops to far below freezing. Some ants create living bridges with their own bodies. Army ants travel in vast columns, crossing terrain in search of food in numbers that can reach hundreds of thousands of individuals. When they encounter a gap, a crack in the earth, or a gap between leaves or branches, some of the ants do something extraordinary. They stop moving and use their bodies to fill the gap, gripping one another with their legs and forming a living structure that the rest of the colony walks across. These living bridges form within seconds. The ants making up the bridge hold themselves rigid and motionless while thousands of their colony mates walk directly over them. Scientists have studied these bridges and found that they self-optimize over time, widening when traffic increases and narrowing when fewer ants need to pass. The ants that form the bridge appear to use the vibrations of feet passing over them to determine whether they are needed or whether the bridge can be released. When the column has passed, they disassemble themselves and rejoin the march, as if they had simply paused for a moment on the way to somewhere important. The moon is slowly drifting away from Earth. Every year, the moon moves approximately 3.8 centimeters farther from Earth. This retreat has been happening for billions of years, driven by the gravitational interaction between the moon and Earth's oceans. As Earth rotates, the tidal bulges it creates pull slightly ahead of the moon's position, and this asymmetry gradually transfers energy from Earth's rotation to the Moon's orbit, causing the Moon to drift outward very slowly. In the distant past, the Moon was significantly closer and would have appeared much larger in the sky. The tides it raised would have been dramatically stronger, and Earth's days would have been shorter because the same gravitational interaction that pushes the Moon away also slows Earth's rotation over time. A day on early Earth was only about 6 hours long. Over billions of years, that drag has stretched it to the 24 hours we know now. The Moon will continue its slow retreat for as long as both Earth and Moon exist, a relationship shifting on timescales so vast they are nearly impossible to hold in the mind all at once. Some flowers only open at night and are pollinated entirely by moths. During the day, these flowers remain tightly closed, their petals pressed together, unremarkable and overlooked. But as dusk settles and the light fades, they slowly unfurl. Pale petals open wide, often white or cream-colored to reflect what moonlight there is. And with their opening, they release their fragrance into the cooling night air. The scent is often different from day-blooming flowers, heavier, richer, sometimes sweet and almost overwhelming in a small space. The moths that pollinate them navigate by starlight and moonlight, and they are drawn from great distances by the rising fragrance. Some are long-tongued hawk moths capable of hovering in front of a flower the way a hummingbird does, reaching into deep, tubular blossoms to sip nectar while dusting their bodies with pollen. The relationship between these flowers and their nighttime visitors is precise, each flower's dimensions often perfectly match to the tongue length of the specific moth species that pollinates it. When morning comes, the flowers close again, their night's work complete, resting quietly through the hours of daylight until evening calls them open once more. Some whale songs contain structures that repeat across generations. Humpback whales sing some of the most complex vocalizations in the animal kingdom. A single song can last for 20 minutes and then be repeated continuously for hours. These songs are produced only by males and are thought to play a role in attracting mates or communicating with other whales over vast distances. What makes them especially remarkable is how they change over time and how those changes travel. Within a whale population, songs evolve. One whale begins singing a new phrase or modifying a pattern. If others adopt the change, it spreads through the group the way a new melody might spread among musicians in a tradition. Researchers studying different whale populations across ocean basins have found that new song patterns can spread from one population to another, moving westward across the Pacific over the course of just a few years. The songs travel with the whales, and between them, a living musical tradition passed along through attention and repetition, constantly evolving, never quite the same from one season to the next. Rainforests can create their own clouds through water released by trees. Stand at the edge of a tropical rainforest on a warm morning and watch the air above it closely. If conditions are right, you may see something extraordinary. Thin wisps of mist rise from the canopy, curling upward, thickening as they go. Over the course of a few hours, these wisps can join and grow into clouds that hang directly above the forest, distinct from those forming elsewhere in the sky. This is the forest breathing. Trees release water vapor through tiny pores in their leaves in a process called transpiration, and in a dense rainforest with hundreds of tree species and millions of individual trees per square kilometer, This collective breathing releases enormous quantities of moisture into the air every single day. This moisture rises, cools, condenses, and forms clouds that eventually release it as rain, which falls back onto the same forest that breathed it up. The forest is creating its own weather, sustaining its own rainfall cycle in a loop that has continued for millions of years. Scientists studying deforestation have found that when too many trees are removed, this cycle weakens and rainfall in the region declines, the forest slowly losing its ability to water itself. Some mushrooms can break down plastic. In the early years of this century, researchers discovered something that seemed almost too good to be true. Certain species of fungi are capable of breaking down plastics, substances that were once believed to be nearly indestructible in nature. A fungus called Pestaloteuthis microspora was found to consume polyurethane, a common type of plastic, as its sole source of carbon, even in conditions with no oxygen, meaning it could potentially digest plastic deep inside landfills where air does not reach. Further research has uncovered other fungal species with similar abilities, each producing different enzymes that attack the chemical bonds in plastic materials. The field is still young, and the practical applications require significant development before these fungi could make a measurable impact on the world's accumulated plastic waste. But the discovery itself shifted something fundamental in how scientists think about the limits of life. For billions of years, fungi have been Earth's great decomposers, breaking down wood, leaves, and organic matter that would otherwise accumulate indefinitely. It appears that in the short history of plastic, some fungi are already beginning to adapt. Some lakes sit inside ancient meteor craters and are millions of years old. When a large meteor strikes the Earth, the impact carves a bowl into the crust, blasting rock outward in all directions. Over time, these depressions can fill with water, forming crater lakes that are among the most geologically ancient bodies of water on the planet. Lake Basumtwi in Ghana sits inside a meteor crater formed about 1.07 million years ago. Lake Elgigitgin in Siberia formed from an impact approximately 3.6 million years ago and holds a record of climate history stretching back to a time before humans existed anywhere on Earth. These lakes are valuable to scientists not just for their geology but for what lies in their sediments. Each year, material settles to the bottom of the lake, layer by layer, forming an unbroken record of every climate shift, volcanic eruption, and ecological change that took place during the lake's existence. By drilling down through these layers, researchers can read conditions that predate the existence of our species, understanding ancient climates the way a reader might slowly turn the pages of a very old book. Some birds decorate their nests with plants that repel insects. European starlings and a number of other bird species gather specific herbs and aromatic plants when constructing their nests. Researchers initially assumed this was decorative behavior or simply a matter of convenient material availability. Closer study revealed something more purposeful. The plants these birds select most often, things like wild carrot, fleabane, and yarrow, have chemical properties that repel or kill certain mites and parasites. When these plants are placed in the nest, they release compounds into the microenvironment of the cup, reducing the number of parasitic insects that would otherwise colonize the bedding and feed on the developing chicks. The birds appear to select these plants specifically for this purpose, choosing them over other equally available materials. The behavior may be learned or it may be instinctive. The question is not yet fully settled. But the result is clear. The nest that contains certain herbs has fewer parasites, and the chicks in it develop more successfully. The bird is, without a laboratory or a formula, practicing a form of medicine. Some rivers carry so much sediment they change color completely. The Missouri River in North America is sometimes called the Big Muddy for good reason. During periods of high water, the river carries such a dense load of silt and clay that its water turns a rich, opaque brown, completely concealing the riverbed from view even in shallow sections. The same phenomenon occurs in rivers around the world, from the Yellow River in China to the Ganges during monsoon season. The color of a river can shift dramatically with the seasons, from relatively clear during dry months to thick and heavily colored during rain or snowmelt. This suspended sediment is not simply dirt, it is the material through which rivers build their deltas, construct floodplains, and deliver nutrients to coastal estuaries. Where large rivers meet the sea, the sediment fans out into shallow underwater plains that are among the most biologically productive environments on Earth. The muddy brown water of a swollen river is, in a sense, a delivery system, carrying the fertility of the interior toward the coast, one invisible particle at a time. Some animals grow entirely new eyes when they lose the old one. Among invertebrates, the capacity for regeneration extends to body parts that seem far too complex to rebuild. Certain species of flatworm can be cut into many pieces, each of which will regenerate into a complete organism within a matter of weeks. But among animals with more complex structures, the jumping spider relative, the hydra, can regrow a completely functional head, including primitive eyes if the original is removed. Some species of sea star and brittle star can regrow not only arms but the light-sensing structures at their tips. Even more remarkably, the axolotl, a type of salamander found in lakes near Mexico City, can regenerate functional eyes if they are damaged. The cells around the wound revert to an earlier developmental state, losing their specialized identities, then multiply and reorganize, building a new eye from the pool of undifferentiated material. The new eye connects to the brain and functions normally within weeks. Scientists study these animals intensely in the hope of understanding what signals guide this process and whether anything similar could one day be activated in animals like humans that have lost the ability to regenerate. The Earth's core rotates slightly faster than the surface. Beneath your feet, far below the bedrock and the mantle, Earth has a solid inner core made primarily of iron and nickel. This inner core is approximately the size of the Moon and sits at a temperature close to 6,000 degrees Celsius, about as hot as the surface of the Sun. But one of its stranger properties is its rotation. While the rest of the Earth turns on its axis once every 24 hours, the inner core appears to rotate at a slightly different rate, completing its turn fractionally faster over the course of a year. This differential rotation was first suggested in the 1990s and has been studied using seismic wave data from earthquakes. Waves passing through the inner core take slightly different amounts of time depending on whether they travel with or against its relative motion, revealing its independent movement. The reasons behind this behavior involve the complex interactions between the inner core, the liquid outer core surrounding it, and the planet's magnetic field. The Earth is, in a sense, not one rotating body but several nested ones, each turning at its own pace inside the other. Some plants can survive complete dehydration and come back to life. A small number of extraordinary plants are able to lose nearly all of the water in their tissues, drying to the point where they appear completely dead, and then recover fully when water is reintroduced. These are called resurrection plants, and they have developed remarkable molecular tools that protect their cells from the damage that normally destroys living tissue during desiccation. One of the most well-known is the Rose of Jericho, a small plant native to desert regions of the Middle East and North Africa. In dry conditions, it curls its stems and leaves inward into a tight ball, becoming dry and brown and apparently lifeless. It may remain this way for years, rolling across the desert carried by wind, utterly dormant. When placed in water, even decades after desiccation, it uncurls its stems and turns green within hours, resuming growth as if no time has passed. Researchers studying these plants have found that they produce specific protective proteins and sugars during dehydration that essentially replace the water in their cells, preserving molecular structures in a kind of suspended state until the water returns. Sleeping animals dream in patterns similar to humans. Scientists have long observed that many animals display behaviors during sleep that suggest they are dreaming. Mice, for example, show bursts of rapid eye movement during sleep and produce patterns of brain activity that closely resemble those recorded when they are actively navigating a maze while awake, as if they are running the maze again in their minds. Birds show similar electrical patterns in their brains during sleep phases that correspond to the songs they learned during the day, apparently replaying and consolidating their musical memory. Even simpler animals like zebrafish, which have relatively basic nervous systems, show evidence of REM-like states during sleep. The function of dreaming across species is still debated, but many researchers believe it is connected to memory consolidation, the brain sorting and storing the experiences of waking life. If so, then the peculiar vividness and strangeness of a dream might be the price of memory, the brain threading the day's events into the larger fabric of what is known and felt and remembered. Every animal that sleeps deeply might be doing this same quiet work in the dark. Some lakes are permanently layered and never mix. Most lakes around the world mix their waters seasonally. In autumn, surface water cools, becomes denser and sinks, allowing water from the depths to rise in a process called turnover. But some lakes are so chemically complex that this mixing never happens. These are called meromictic lakes, and their deep waters may remain undisturbed for thousands of years. Lake Kivu, on the border between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, is one such lake. Its depths are saturated with dissolved carbon dioxide and methane produced by geothermal activity below. This heavy gas-rich water is far denser than the fresh water above it and stays locked in place, a permanent separation maintained by the difference in density between the layers. The deep water of such lakes holds conditions that can be radically different from the surface, sometimes anoxic, sometimes rich in minerals, sometimes home to entirely unique microbial ecosystems that have been evolving in isolation for millennia. The surface of the lake can be calm and clear and apparently ordinary, while far below a world preserved in stillness exists that has not touched open air since before recorded history. Some animals use sound to see. Bats are perhaps the most familiar example of animals that navigate and hunt using sound rather than light, but they are far from alone. Dolphins produce clicking sounds that travel through water and return as echoes, allowing them to build detailed three-dimensional maps of their surroundings. Certain cave-dwelling birds called oilbirds use a similar form of echolocation to fly through pitch-black caves without collision. Some species of shrew produce ultrasonic clicks that help them detect objects in low-light conditions. The resolution available to animals using sound is extraordinary. A bat hunting a moth in complete darkness can detect an object the width of a human hair using the echoes from its calls. Dolphins can distinguish between objects made of different materials by echolocation alone, identifying the shape, texture, and even internal structure of things they have never touched. The sound paints a picture with far more detail than most people would guess, a kind of invisible sculpture of the surrounding space assembled from the time it takes for echoes to arrive. The oldest forests on Earth were full of trees unlike anything alive today. In the Devonian period, roughly 385 million years ago, the first true forests were spreading across the land. But they were unlike any forest alive today. The dominant plants were not conifers or flowering trees. They were giant club mosses and tree ferns that grew to enormous heights, and towering plants called Archaeopteris, which were among the first to develop what we would recognize as proper wood. These ancient forests had no birds singing in their canopy, no mammals foraging on their floors. The most complex animals in them were insects and primitive amphibians just beginning to venture onto land. The trees had root systems that were still learning, in an evolutionary sense, how to penetrate and break down rock. This root expansion is thought to have dramatically altered the chemistry of the soil and the atmosphere during this period, pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and contributing to a global cooling event. The forests did not simply grow from the earth, they reshaped it, changing the air, the water, and the soil in ways that made the planet we know today possible. Some birds can see magnetic fields as visual patterns. European robins and a number of other migratory bird species appear to experience Earth's magnetic field not as a vague sensation but as a visual overlay, something they may actually see superimposed on their normal vision. This remarkable ability appears to involve specialized proteins in the bird's eyes called cryptochromes, which are sensitive to magnetic field orientation. When light hits these proteins, it triggers chemical reactions that differ depending on the angle of the magnetic field. And researchers believe this translates into a visual pattern the bird perceives against the background of what it is looking at. If this is correct, a migrating robin sees its path through the world with a kind of compass overlay built directly into its vision, a pattern of brightness or shadow that tells it which direction leads where. Studies have shown that covering one of a robin's eyes, specifically the eye containing the most light-sensitive tissue, disrupts the bird's ability to orient itself magnetically, supporting the theory that the sense is genuinely visual. It is a form of perception so foreign to human experience that it is nearly impossible to imagine seeing the invisible lines of a planetary magnetic field woven into the ordinary view of a sunlit hedge. Some caves contain air that has not circulated for thousands of years. In deep cave systems sealed by geology and distance from any surface opening, the air inside can remain largely unchanged for extraordinary lengths of time. Scientists studying ancient ice cores drilled from the Antarctic ice sheet have retrieved air bubbles containing atmospheric samples from hundreds of thousands of years ago, providing a direct chemical record of past climates. In a similar way, sealed cave chambers in certain geological formations can trap air that has not mixed with the external atmosphere for millennia. The conditions inside these sealed spaces are often extremely stable, with temperatures, humidity, and gas concentrations remaining virtually constant across vast spans of time. Some of the microorganisms found in such chambers have been isolated from outside life so long that they have evolved completely independently, adapting to their closed environment in ways that make them unlike anything found on the surface. Encountering such a pocket of ancient air would be, in a real sense, breathing the past, inhaling a moment of the world's atmosphere from a time when the landscape above the cave was inhabited by entirely different creatures. The surface of still water can hold objects that appear to defy gravity. Surface tension is one of those invisible forces that changes the behavior of water in ways that seem almost magical. The surface of calm water acts like an elastic skin created by the tendency of water molecules to cling to one another more strongly than they cling to the air above. This skin is surprisingly strong relative to the weight of very small objects. Water striders walk across it routinely, their long legs distributing their weight across a large area so that they barely depress the surface at all. A carefully placed needle will rest on the surface of still water rather than sinking, balanced not by anything solid, but by the collective strength of the molecules pulling at its edges. A small drop of liquid can bead into a near-perfect sphere on the surface of a waxy leaf, rolling without spreading because the surface tension holds it together. These phenomena have practical uses in the natural world, from the water strider using the surface as solid ground to certain spiders that use surface tension to travel on water. But they also simply represent one of those places where physics creates something that looks, to the casual eye, entirely like a small miracle. Some plants can move their leaves to track the sun across the sky. Sunflowers are the most famous example, but many plants track sunlight through a mechanism called solar tracking or heliotropism. Young sunflower plants, before they have set their flower heads, turn from east to west during the day to face the sun, then reset overnight, so they are facing east again by dawn. This is achieved through differential growth on opposite sides of the stem, the shaded side growing slightly faster and pushing the plant toward the light. The benefit is significant. A leaf or flower that faces the sun directly receives more photosynthetically active light than one that sits at an angle, and in the case of flowers, a warmer surface temperature attracts more insects for pollination. Some alpine plants also track the sun, using their bowl-shaped flowers as reflectors to concentrate warmth at their center, creating a warmer microenvironment that makes them more attractive to insects seeking a place to rest out of the mountain cold. The plant cannot turn as an animal turns, swiveling a head on a neck. It grows its way toward what it needs. Entire island ecosystems can develop from a single founding population. When a new island forms, whether through volcanic activity or through the slow rise of land from a changing sea level, it arrives as bare rock. Everything that eventually lives there must arrive from somewhere else. The first colonizers are typically bacteria, then algae, and simple plants, then insects carried on the wind, then birds, then eventually reptiles and mammals transported on floating vegetation or across short water gaps. Each species that successfully establishes itself opens a door for others. A plant provides food and shelter for an insect. The insect pollinates the plant and attracts birds. The birds carry seeds in their feathers and digestive tracts, seeding the island with new plants. Over thousands of years, this cascade can build something extraordinary. The Hawaiian Islands, for instance, produced hundreds of unique bird species, enormous numbers of unique insects, and thousands of unique plant species, all derived from a relatively small number of founders that arrived on empty volcanic rock millions of years ago. Evolution on islands tends to be rapid and dramatic, unconstrained by the competition of an established mainland ecosystem. The island becomes a laboratory where life reinvents itself in relative isolation. Some frogs can hear through their mouths. The gardener's Seychelles frog is one of the smallest frogs in the world, measuring less than a centimeter in length, and it has no functional outer or middle ear. For many years, scientists wondered how this tiny creature communicated at all, since frogs rely heavily on sound for finding mates and establishing territory. The answer turned out to be entirely unexpected. Researchers discovered that these frogs use their mouths as resonating chambers. Sound waves vibrate the tissue in the floor of the mouth, and these vibrations are transmitted through the frog's body to its inner ear, bypassing the external structures other frogs use entirely. This mechanism is functional even though it is anatomically unusual, and the frogs can produce and detect the calls their species uses for communication. It is a solution to the problem of hearing that evolved completely independently of the pathway most vertebrates use, a reminder that when a biological function is important enough, life will find a way to achieve it, even through structures that were not originally designed for that purpose. Some deserts are growing slowly every year. The edge between desert and more habitable land is not a fixed line. In many parts of the world, deserts are expanding gradually at their margins through a process called desertification. When land at the edge of a desert is overgrazed, its plant cover thins and the soil, no longer held in place by roots, becomes vulnerable to erosion. Wind carries the topsoil away, leaving bare ground that reflects more heat, reduces rainfall through altered evaporation patterns, and becomes increasingly inhospitable to the plant life that might otherwise stabilize it. The Sahara has grown substantially in the past century, advancing southward in some regions by kilometers per year. But the process also has natural rhythms. At the southern edge of the Sahara, in a belt called the Sahel, scientists have observed in satellite imagery that the desert has actually retreated in some areas over recent decades as rainfall patterns shifted and certain regions saw more vegetation return. The boundary is not a wall, but a living edge, responsive to rainfall and temperature and land use, moving back and forth across the landscape over years and centuries in a slow, irregular tide. The fur of a polar bear is not white. This is one of those facts that seems implausible at first, but the hairs that make up a polar bear's outer coat are individually transparent. Each hair is a hollow tube with no pigment. The appearance of whiteness comes from the same optical effect that makes snow appear white, the scattering and reflection of light from many surfaces at once. When all the light bouncing around inside and between the transparent hairs combines, the bear appears white to the eye. In practice, polar bear fur can appear cream or yellowish in certain light conditions, and in zoos where the bear's fur sometimes harbors algae inside the hollow shafts, it can take on a greenish tint. Beneath the transparent fur, the bear's skin is entirely black, maximizing the absorption of any solar heat that penetrates the coat. The combination of insulating transparent fur above and heat-absorbing black skin below makes the polar bear extremely well suited to capturing warmth in the Arctic environment. The whiteness that makes them nearly invisible against snow and ice is, in a physical sense, not really white at all. Some trees produce fruit only once and then die. Among the more dramatic strategies in the plant world, there is a group known as monocarpic plants, which spend their entire vegetative lives building toward a single, ultimate reproductive event. The most extreme examples among trees include certain species of bamboo, which are technically woody grasses, and can grow for 60 to 120 years before flowering simultaneously across entire populations, producing seeds and then dying together. This synchronized mass flowering, called masting, overwhelms the local populations of seed-eating animals. There are so many seeds produced at once that no matter how many rodents and birds and insects eat them, there are still enough left over to germinate and produce the next generation. The strategy sacrifices the individual plant entirely, but ensures the survival of the offspring. When a bamboo forest flowers and dies, the transformation can be eerily sudden. A forest that stood for a century disappears in months, leaving behind an open field of dead grey stems and a new generation of green shoots emerging from the soil below. Some animals can regrow their hearts. The zebrafish is a small, striped freshwater fish commonly kept in aquariums, and it holds a remarkable secret. If up to 20% of its heart muscle is removed, the heart will regenerate within 2 months, growing back functional tissue that beats and pumps normally. This is not a limited or scarce ability. It works reliably every time and produces heart muscle that is genuinely new, not scar tissue. In mammals, including humans, heart cells largely stop dividing shortly after birth. When heart muscle is damaged by a heart attack, it is replaced by scar tissue that cannot contract, reducing the heart's efficiency permanently. The zebrafish accomplishes something mammals cannot by reactivating a program of cell division in its heart muscle that most vertebrates switch off early in development. Scientists studying this regeneration have identified some of the molecular signals involved, and ongoing research aims to understand whether those same pathways could be nudged back toward activity in mammalian hearts. The zebrafish swims in tanks around the world, unaware that in its small, striped body, it carries the answer to a question that affects millions of human lives. Light from the sun takes 8 minutes to reach us, but the journey inside the sun takes far longer. The sunlight warming your skin right now left the surface of the sun about 8 minutes ago, traveling at the speed of light across the vacuum of space. That part of the journey is well known, but what is less often considered is the far longer journey the energy made before it reached the sun's surface. Energy is produced in the sun's core through nuclear fusion, where hydrogen atoms are combined under extraordinary pressure and temperature to form helium, releasing energy in the process. But the sun's interior is so dense that this energy does not travel outward quickly. Photons, particles of light produced in the core, are constantly absorbed and re-emitted by the dense plasma around them, zigzagging outward in what is called a random walk. The average time for a photon's energy to travel from the sun's core to its surface is estimated to be between 10,000 and 100,000 years. After a journey of perhaps 100,000 years through the interior of the star, the light then crosses the 150 million kilometers of empty space between the Sun and Earth in just over 8 minutes. The warmth of an afternoon has been a very long time in the making. Some insects navigate by the polarization of light in the sky. On a clear day, the sky contains a pattern invisible to human eyes but perfectly legible to many insects. Sunlight is scattered by the atmosphere into polarized patterns, meaning the light waves oscillate in specific orientations that vary across different parts of the sky. Honeybees, desert ants, and many other insects can detect this polarization through specialized cells in their eyes, giving them a built-in navigational compass that works even when the sun is obscured behind clouds. Desert ants, which forage across featureless sand flats where no landmarks are visible, use polarized light patterns along with an internal step counter to navigate back to their nest after foraging journeys of hundreds of meters. They can count their own strides, combine that information with their polarized light compass reading, and calculate a direct route home from any point in their journey. Experiments that obscured the ants' view of the sky or attached tiny stilts to their legs to change their stride length produced predictable and measurable navigational errors, confirming that these two sources of information are both being actively used. The deep ocean contains mountain ranges taller than Everest. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a continuous mountain range running the full length of the Atlantic Ocean basin from north to south, longer than any mountain range on land. Parts of it rise to heights that would dwarf most surface peaks, though its summits remain thousands of meters below the ocean surface. The world's longest mountain chain is not the Himalayas or the Andes. It is an underwater range stretching approximately 80,000 kilometers around the globe along the edges of tectonic plates. At these underwater ridges, tectonic plates are slowly pulling apart and molten rock wells up from below to fill the gap, creating new ocean floor continuously. The process is slow enough to be imperceptible in a human lifetime, but fast enough to have built entire ocean basins over millions of years. The Atlantic Ocean did not exist when dinosaurs first appeared. It has grown from a narrow seaway to its present width over the course of about 200 million years, pushed apart by the steady upwelling of new rock along the ridge that runs beneath it, a hidden mountain range growing silently in the dark at the bottom of the sea. Some animals breathe without lungs. Skin breathing or cutaneous respiration is the ability to absorb oxygen directly through the skin from water or air without using lungs or gills at all. Earthworms rely entirely on skin breathing, which is why they must remain moist, and why a dry earthworm is a dying one. Certain salamanders in the family Plethodontidae are entirely lungless, absorbing all their oxygen through their skin and the lining of their mouths and throats. These animals have been lungless for approximately 60 million years, suggesting that once the lungs were lost, they were not necessary for survival in the cool, well-oxygenated mountain streams where these salamanders live. Even some animals with functional lungs supplement their oxygen intake through their skin. The Australian lungfish can breathe air using primitive lungs, but also absorbs oxygen through its moist skin. Some sea snakes absorb up to 1/3 of their oxygen cutaneously while diving. The diversity of solutions life has found to the basic problem of getting oxygen from the surrounding environment into living tissue is one of the more elegant demonstrations that biology is not constrained to a single answer. When the conditions favor it, any surface can become a lung. The first flowers appeared approximately 130 million years ago. Before flowering plants evolved, the world's landscapes were dominated by ferns, horsetails, mosses, and cone-bearing trees like conifers and cycads. These plants reproduced without flowers, relying on wind or water to carry their spores or pollen. Then, during the Cretaceous period, something new appeared. The first flowering plants, or angiosperms, began to diversify. Their flowers were a new kind of structure, evolved to attract and reward specific animal visitors in exchange for carrying pollen from one plant to another. The relationship between flowers and their pollinators drove an explosion of diversity that produced the staggering variety of flowering plants alive today. More than 300,000 described species, representing about 90% of all plant species on Earth. It also shaped the evolution of insects, birds, and mammals, many of which co-evolved with flowering plants in relationships of mutual dependence. The sudden appearance and diversification of flowering plants puzzled Charles Darwin, who called it an abominable mystery. The full answer still involves questions that researchers are actively working on, but the basic outline is now understood. It was a relationship between plant and animal, flower and visitor, that changed the face of the Earth. Some landscapes remember the shapes of ice sheets that disappeared thousands of years ago. The great ice sheets that covered much of North America and Northern Europe during the last ice age reached their maximum extent roughly 20,000 years ago. At that time, ice over 3 kilometers thick sat above what is now Chicago, Stockholm, and much of Canada. The weight of this ice depressed the crust of the Earth downward, pressing it into the softer mantle rock below. When the ice melted, beginning around 15,000 years ago, the crust slowly began to rebound, rising back toward its unweighted position in a process called isostatic rebound that continues to this day. Parts of Scandinavia are still rising at a rate of about a centimetre per year. Coastlines that were once inland are now rising out of the sea, and the shapes of bays and fjords that were carved by glaciers are slowly shifting as the land beneath them ascends. The ice is long gone, but the land still remembers its weight, still releasing itself from the impression of something that covered it for tens of thousands of years. Some birds perform dances that are learned and passed down through generations. Male manakins in the tropical forests of Central and South America are among the world's most dedicated performers. Some species spend the vast majority of their lives practicing and performing elaborate choreographed displays in the hope of attracting a female. The dances involve wing-snapping sounds produced at extraordinary speed, back and forth movements along a perch, and in some species, coordinated performances between two males who work together in a kind of partnership. Young males spend years as apprentices, watching older, more successful performers and gradually learning the precise sequences involved. The movements must be nearly perfect to attract a female's attention. A slightly mistimed snap or an imprecise turn is noticed and judged. The displays are so complex and so consistently reproduced across generations that they have the character of cultural traditions, behaviors learned by observation and practice rather than born from instinct alone. In the dim green light of the forest understory, these birds perform the same dances their ancestors performed, their whole lives organized around the perfection of a few seconds of movement. The human body contains approximately 37 trillion cells, each one a living thing in itself. Every cell in your body is, in a fundamental sense, alive. It has a membrane that regulates what enters and leaves. It produces energy, responds to chemical signals, repairs its own damage, and ultimately divides or dies. The cells that make up your liver are carrying out hundreds of simultaneous chemical reactions right now. The cells lining your stomach are producing acid. The cells in your retinas are responding to the photons of light coming from these words. And every cell in your body contains a full copy of the DNA that encodes how to build you. The number 37 trillion is so large it resists imagination. If you counted 1 cell per second without stopping, it would take well over 1 million years to reach 37 trillion. And yet all of these cells are coordinating in ways so seamlessly organized that you move, think, breathe, and dream without having to consciously direct any of it. Each one of the cells in your body right now is doing its work quietly, precisely, in the dark interior of your living self as you rest. Some rivers flow for hundreds of kilometers underground. In regions where the bedrock is made of limestone, a type of rock that dissolves slowly in mildly acidic water, rivers do not always travel on the surface. Over thousands of years, water dissolves the limestone, opening cracks into passages and passages into caverns. Eventually, entire rivers can vanish from the surface and travel for considerable distances through the dark interior of the rock before re-emerging as springs or at the edge of a cliff face. The Puerto Princesa underground river in the Philippines travels for over 8 kilometers through a cave system before emptying into the sea. The cave it occupies contains enormous chambers, the ceiling of one large enough to hold several aircraft carriers side by side. The river flows silently through these chambers in complete darkness, its surface sometimes glassy and still, sometimes broken by the drip of water from stalactites far overhead. Bat colonies numbering in the millions roost in the cave ceiling above it, and the sounds and smells of a vibrant ecosystem fill the air despite the total absence of sunlight. Some animals spend more of their lives asleep than awake. The brown bat, one of the most common bat species in North America, spends approximately 19 hours of every day sleeping. For the portion of the year when insects are unavailable due to cold weather, it adds months of hibernation on top of this already sleep-heavy schedule, entering a state of metabolic slowing so profound that its heart may beat only a few times per minute, and its body temperature drops to just above the temperature of its surroundings. Koalas sleep between 18 and 22 hours per day, a strategy partly driven by the low nutritional value of their eucalyptus leaf diet, which requires long rest periods to process. Even large, active predators like lions sleep up to 20 hours per day when food is plentiful. Sleep in animals is not laziness. It is a fundamental biological process, as vital as eating. The brain during sleep is busy, consolidating memories, clearing metabolic waste, regulating hormones, and carrying out maintenance work that cannot be done efficiently while the animal is awake and active. The long sleepers of the animal world are not idle. They are simply doing their most important work in the dark. There are mountains made of salt that are slowly melting in the rain. In certain parts of Iran and other arid regions, thick deposits of ancient salt have been pushed upward by tectonic forces into dome shapes that eventually break through the surface as salt mountains. These formations can be hundreds of meters high and are composed almost entirely of halite, ordinary table salt, in massive crystalline layers. The surfaces of these mountains glisten in the sunlight, reflecting it with a brightness that can be seen from a great distance. But salt dissolves readily in water, and every rainfall, however rare in these desert regions, slowly erodes the mountain's surface, carving channels and rills down its flanks, and occasionally forming small caves where slightly acidic rainwater has found a weakness in the rock. In some locations, springs at the base of salt mountains produce brine too salty for most organisms to survive in. The mountains are temporary by geological standards, slowly dissolving back into the landscape over thousands of years, their shapes constantly changing with each season's rain, ancient seabeds making their way back toward the sea. And so our quiet journey through the hidden and extraordinary world of nature reaches its gentle end for tonight. We have moved through the deep ocean and into the sky above clouds, through the interior of the sun and the frozen chambers beneath Antarctica. We have visited forests that breathe out their own weather, and caves that breathe like living things, and rivers that vanish into the earth and flow unseen for miles before emerging into the light again. Some of what we found tonight was about patience. A clam growing its 500th ring on the ocean floor. A bamboo forest waiting a century to bloom. A photon spending 100,000 years making its way from the core of a star to its surface before crossing space in 8 minutes. Some of it was about connection. Ants building bridges from their own bodies. Trees sending warnings through the air to their neighbors. Whales carrying their songs across entire oceans. And some of it was simply about the strangeness and beauty of a world that keeps surprising us no matter how carefully we look or how long we look for. If you are still listening now, you have kept your mind gently open through all of these quiet wonders. And that is a lovely thing. But if your thoughts have already begun to drift, if these words have become more like a soft sound than a clear meaning, then that is exactly as it should be. You have done enough for today. The world will keep its secrets and its wonders for another night. Let your breath slow now. Let whatever image you are holding, a glowing bay, a snow-quiet forest, a small bat folded into sleep, let it soften and blur at the edges until it is more feeling than picture. Nature will still be here tomorrow, patient and endlessly full of stories. Good night.